That was such a beautiful theme. And I know music's really subjective, but I found the music really, really beautiful today. I have a theme that comes up every time in doing the practice that I have a question about. And so I have this layer that every time it already starts, before the session starts, there's something coming up that's saying, I just want stillness. I don't want to move. I want complete emptiness. I want nothing. Yes. And so, you know, with the assignment being like, no matter what you do, keep moving at all times, it always rubs up against that place, because I kind of feel like, okay, so what can I give to that part? Like, you know, how can I honor that feeling and still move? And so I found it a bit easier today, because somehow the practice, either I was gentler with myself, or the theme of the practice was more gentle. It was not as tough as the last times, or maybe it's more healing, but I wonder if you had any insight on that.
Yes, good question. Dina has a related question there as well. So this applies to what you're asking as well, Dina. Where shall I start? There are a few different things. So in any question, of course, and anybody who knows me knows that about me, right? There is no one pat answer, right? There's a lot of subtlety and nuance to working with your entire system. And often where we enter into a question, it's a little bit like, you know, a high rise. You can enter at the bottom, you can enter, maybe there's a mountain behind it, you can enter on top, or, you know, somewhere in between. So anywhere you enter, any level you enter, you can unpack it differently. And sometimes these answers are somewhat contradictory, because they have to do with where you enter. Mm-hmm. Right? So for instance, on the second floor balcony, you don't see the same view as you see on the 15th floor balcony. So this question has a few views from different balconies.
Yeah.
Right? So one view from one balcony is that you want to give your system as much permission, rest, and recuperation and repair as possible, because most of us push our body too much and consistently. And a lot of what we do is a pulling on the adrenals, so to speak. We kind of pull on the adrenals and we do things. So when you have that need, Dina was saying, I just wanted to lay quietly, right? When you have that need to just rest and you feel really tired and you can feel the fatigue in your body, and you know, you're kind of sensitizing to how tired you really are. There is, of course, a specific space for that, where that needs to be given acknowledgement and permission, right? So I'm saying that to say, don't ever override the needs and messages of your body, right? It's very important. A few balconies up, we have to say, this is a specific practice that facilitates nervous system repair and relaxation and release and understanding through movement. So it's not a stillness practice. And in the movement, we sensitize to that fatigue and to the depletion. And so movement in a certain way is a way to sensitize to what's actually happening and have an honest understanding of what's actually happening, which is you're worn out, you're tired, you're fatigued, you might have a freeze response, right? So we're using movement as a vehicle for exploration, and hence, that's why I'm saying you can just do this, right? But just by doing this, you are working against the freeze, or working against the unwillingness to feel, because once again, a few balconies up or down, depending on how you want to see it, there is a mechanism in the body that freezes us, that debilitates us, that locks us down, that makes us tired, that makes us feel bored, when we're actually hitting on an area that needs to be felt more deeply or explored more deeply. Yeah. And so when people do longer nonlinear practices, and also in the practitioner training, and you know, where you have to do an ongoing practice, you'll hit pockets, and I still do to this day, You'll hit pockets where you just don't feel like there's anything there. You're somewhat bored. It's blah. Why do it? I could just have a nap. There's much more interesting things to do out there. And I know now, of course, after all these years, that when I hit one of those areas, that means there's gold right underneath that surface, because there's a natural tendency to want to not go certain places, emotionally, physically, psychically, mentally, right? So when you have one of those slump things, it's good to know that that could also mean you're hitting upon something, right? Okay. And that something could be a freeze, or it could be just a resistance, or it could be the unknown, or it could be actually something that frees a lot of energy, because often the areas of contraction hold a lot of energy, and when you actually release that, you suddenly have so much more free energy. Steve always talks about pushing the beach ball underwater, right? Mm-hmm. If you spend an enormous amount of energy pushing the beach ball underwater, you don't have energy to swim, right? Mm-hmm. But when that thing pops up and suddenly you are free, then you have all that energy available for other things. And so that can also be the case, right? Mm-hmm. So all of those are layers to consider when you feel like you don't want to move, right? Maybe to begin with, you don't move much, you just move a finger and you let the relaxation go through your body, and you feel what it's like to have a bit more relaxation and access. And then you'll move again a bit, and then you can notice that you've hit upon something that's actually a freeze or an unwillingness to feel something, or both. And so you work with it, and there's no one size fits all. And of course you can work with it in meditation where you don't move, right? But this is a movement practice, so movement is part of the exploration, of course.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And that's the thing, right? When you feel those kind of things, you can always say, well, let me try it for a few minutes, and if it doesn't work, then I'll just give myself permission to rest, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the nice thing with a self-guided practice. You don't have to, and there's no shame in not pushing yourself. I said this yesterday in the class, the pushing oneself and pushing to the edge and going beyond the edge is kind of a neo-tantric trope that flies in the face of what anybody who's ever done any trauma-informed work knows, which is you're just creating more scar tissue in an area where you already have injury, so to speak. It's much better to back off and do less and gain the trust of your body back that you're not going to brutalize it, gain the trust of your nervous system back that you're not going to incur more trauma for a momentary state break, a state experience.
Yeah, totally. It's just helpful that sometimes we may think, this is not what I need right now, and sometimes that's exactly so, and sometimes it's not. So it's to not. Just find that discernment when the resistance or the tiredness is really not because this is what we need, but there's something that would be more helpful.
Yes, and I find it always very useful for my own explorations to go up and down the elevator and visit different balconies, so to speak.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Since we were talking about adrenals, I'm in the process of healing adrenal fatigue for the second time. And I'm trying to be really purposeful about my movement so that I'm not pushing myself back. And I was just wondering if you had any extra experience, wisdom, tips, practices, anything to help with adrenals and just that whole process.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you said, which I think is very important when we look at working with adrenal fatigue or healing adrenal fatigue, or however you want to phrase it, is the thing you said, which is you try not to push yourself, right? And so what does pushing oneself mean on a bodily level? Well, what it means on a bodily level is that you're using more energy than you need to get something done. And that particular, if you look at it that way, that you're using more energy than you need to get something done, then you can look at two aspects. One is habitual, and the other one is, let's say, coping based. That's how I slice it in my teaching, right? So habitual is, let's say you learn something, and as you learned it, there was a lot of stress in learning it, emotional stress, or a lot was riding on it, or you really wanted to do good, or you know, there was some emotional component to it. So you tried very hard, but it had the emotional component. And as you learned it over and over and over, that emotional component installed itself with the physical act, let's say. So now, habitually, when you, let's say, ride a bike, right? When you upload the bike mechanism in your body, that includes an emotional component. And that emotional component isn't really related to bike riding. It's related to how you wanted, I'm making this up, how you wanted to please your dad who was holding the bike in the back, right? Or something like that. So, but that's built in now. And so you're using more energy based on the emotional output that comes with it. And so you're zapping energy from your body that you didn't need to zap, right? The human body has only so much energy at any given moment of time. We're not like a computer that can upgrade RAM. We emit about, I think, 440 megahertz per second of the cortex of the brain. That's our output, right? So if you pull a lot from, because you have added complication in your action, you are going to habitually use more energy than you need to use. The other aspect is some kind of either chronic or in the moment coping, where your action, like let's say, has a fear component, because you think if you're not doing this right, you get kicked out or something like that. So you're using extra emotional and with that physical tension to get the thing done, and that will zap energy. So you can look at these things and you can actively work on reducing what I would call maladaptive coping. And you can also look at relaxing the body and doing away with tension that's not needed for the actual action. So if I would get up right now from this safu I'm sitting on, I will have to tense certain muscle groups in order to get up. There's nothing I can do about it. Otherwise, I'm not going to get up, right? But there's no way around that. So I'm going to have to use tension, and I'm going to have to energize my body to get up. Mm-hmm. But there are certain areas that actually don't need to be clenched while I'm getting up. For instance, one of the areas people tend to clench a lot in is the solar plexus, or the sphincter, right? Mm. Your anal sphincter is one of the famous places where people get tight-assed, you know, as they say, because it's an extra contraction. Now, I can get up by articulating the contraction of my buttocks, but I could leave my perineum completely relaxed, because I don't actually need my perineum to get up. I don't need my solar plexus to get up. So you can, in nonlinear is a great place to do this. You can move your body and determine which muscle groups and which also emotional action and contraction you need to get up, for instance, and which are superficial or habitual or excessive. And so when you move in nonlinear, what you'll do is you'll literally feel the area of your adrenals, you know, your lower back, the kidneys, that whole area, and you put attention on that area, and you start getting sensitive when that area gets pulled on, because there's a physical pull. When I go to the chiropractor, my chiropractor can look at my back and see my stress level. Right? She has no problem. She can be very specific. She knows my body well, and she can tell from the area in the lower back above the adrenals how much pushing I'm doing, right? How much my nervous system is aggravated or activated. So you can sensitize yourself to that, and that makes a huge difference. And by the way, the last thing that I want to say about that is it depends on what kind of a type you are. For some people, actual rest, right? Sleeping a lot, napping a lot, meditating is really good. For some people, like the way I'm built, for instance, I don't regenerate well resting, like laying down. I regenerate best doing very relaxed, non-directed, leisurely movement activity. So I do nonlinear to unwind. I do gardening and weeding a lot when I can, which is puttering around the house, beautifying my little altars with flowers, that kind of stuff, where I'm doing non-directed, non-forceful, non-pressured activity to unwind, and that works best for my system. It's not true for every system, but so that's something you can explore. Are you better repairing in a slight movement or in total stillness, or a combination thereof?
I had to do the class in the car because I'm traveling. So my question is around that. So my body during the, during the class wanted to move in very specific ways, but I couldn't because there were people around me. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions when you feel that you want to move, like let's say your arms in a specific way, but you can't. Yeah.
I do a lot, I mean, enormous amount, well, not anymore, but I used to do a lot of nonlinear on planes, right? Because let's say it euphemistically, a nervous flyer, and that's putting it very mildly. There's a reason for that has to do with having dropped a couple of thousand feet in an airplane once. In a clear air turbulence that was unbelievable. And it happened twice in a row. So my body has a feeling of falling when on a plane, which is very difficult. And it's been many years and I've worked diligently so I can fly fine, but I will have to do some form of nonlinear when turbulences happen. So what I do is I just kind of make it almost invisible. You can see my body move a bit. It's just an articulation of my spine and my pelvic floor. I do internal contractions and releases. I might move my shoulders a bit, my neck a bit. I might move with my face a bit. So there's ways that you can do very subtle movements that are still nonlinear, and that give you the contraction and release without that being an issue, right? Flailing wildly in the car. You can also feel the expression that your arms want to do without doing much with the arms, and have your, so to speak, subtle body, your psychic body do the big motions, while your meat body does a very mild expression of that. After some sessions, I'm freezing, I feel cold. What this could mean, how should I react? English is not my mother language. You prefer not to speak. Totally understand, Claudia. So there's a few reasons why you can get cold. And one of the reasons you can get cold is that sometimes when you freeze, so the actual freezing of the body, when the energy starts moving in the body, it feels like shivers. And it can actually feel like right? And you have like a little bit of goosebumps. And by the way, goosebumps in German is chicken skin. No, not chicken, goose skin. So it's not goosebumps, it's goose skin. So in my mind, I'm always thinking of goose skin, but it is goosebumps, right? So you can have goosebumps, you can have a shiver, you might actually physically feel cold. That is a big part of release. So when that happens, one of the things you can do is you can run your hands over your body, and you'll probably feel like when I do this now, I get a little bit of that. You can probably feel there's a little bit more, and the skin gets kind of activated, and then it passes. You could also have a nice hot shower if you have option to do that. And just know that that's one of the things that can happen in release. Now, it could also be that you're not dressed warm enough. That's always an option, right? Because a lot of body heat gets generated, and if you're not, if you're not properly dressed for that to wick out, you could get a bit cold afterwards. So it could be a much more trauma-based explanation, or it could be simply that you're in a room too cold, you get draft somewhere on your back, your kidneys are exposed, that can really make you cold, like if your t-shirt dries up or things like that. So you always want to look at the very, very mundane explanations while also looking at possible, other explanations. That's a great question. So the first thing to be said, of course, is that what you did instinctively is the thing to do. And there's a reason for that. And that is that everything is love in your body, right? Not only the positive emotions, not only the, love and light kind of emotions, but also the darker emotions. It's all love, ultimately. And so by loving the parts of us that we consider unloving, we're of course shining love onto everything. And that is a very powerful practice, right? The self-compassion. And that's why we ended with the touching our own body and being with our own body, because it's easy to imagine that only the exalted feelings of gooey, compassionate regard for others is love, and that the wrath and anger and betrayal we sometimes feel is not, and it all is love. So why I did the thing with the fierceness of love, of course, is because love also has a very, let's call it dark, not dark as in nasty, but dark as in deep, grounded part that is a, fighting for it, tolerating nothing less but, that kind of a thing. So yes, when you kind of relax your contraction around not being love, that of course is love. And that will happen, right? That's part of the package. Otherwise, we're just in love and light land, which is only half of the coin. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
I like what you said in the Q&A on Saturday about, or maybe it was in a Q&A video about the non-impositional nature of the practice and how that relates to adrenals. And, I'm 46 going on 47, so in the thick of perimenopause, and I really appreciate, and I've done lots of heavy practice over the years. I would say more impositional types of practices over the years. So at this stage and age, and at I think maybe the maturity level that I have in my own practice and awareness, this gentle, body-centered, trauma-informed, nervous system-informed type of practice. And I've had some adrenal issues as well. So I'm just really interested in anything you could say around that. Yeah. It's probably a lot that I just said there, but any pieces that stand out.
Yes, well, I think the non-imposition is very, very important, and we talk about that a lot in all our teacher trainings and in all we do. Steve even gives an entire lecture in the teacher training about it, so you'll get to hear about it from different perspectives. Because one of the things that I found in my work, right, I've been at this for a long time now. I've been in private practice since '98. And I started teaching in '99, I believe. So one of the things that I found more and more as time goes on, and the more I look at it, is that this whole going to the edge, pushing past the edge, is not appropriate for people whose nervous systems are not integrated and whose nervous systems are integrated these days, right? So you can actually do quite a bit of damage by pushing people beyond their comfort zone. And it's kind of a neo-tantric trope to do that, injuring areas that already have trauma because they're pushing in those areas, and then there's scar tissue, and then they rip that back open, emotional, psychic scar tissue. So by not imposing on people on one end, we allow the body and the nervous system to actually repair and release. I've said this many times before, but homeostasis happens when parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system work together. So it's not a just rest and digest or fight or flight. It's both need to be present. And the way they have to be present is they have to play with each other in just the right kind of combination for that healing and release to happen. And so that's one of the active underpinnings of nonlinear that, you know, I don't need to talk about because I can just guide you through, but that's behind that. And then under that is also the understanding that what I can tell you to do isn't everything, right? Meaning when we rely on your own body to do the work, total miracles can happen emotionally, physically, and mentally, because it's not just my lens that allows you to do something. Things can happen that I don't even know, that I haven't even experienced myself potentially. And so when you do non-impositional teaching, you are actually acknowledging, so to speak, that you don't know it all, and nobody knows it all. And you're giving the authority to the practitioner's body. And with that, enormously deep and impactful things can happen. So it's super, super important to not impose. That's why also we don't use breath in the practice, because that's an imposition. How do we know what breath is better than our body? We don't, right? We've become so conditioned to mess with our system and to control our system, that when all of that's taken, really incredible things can happen. And so that's very, very important to me, and very important in this practice particularly. And people who've done this practice for a while have reported some really far out things that I didn't even think could happen, simply because nobody, you know, nobody messed with it. So
Totally.
Yeah.
So my question is kind of also sort of related to one of the answers from the workshop from Saturday. You had mentioned on Saturday to avoid, and it also kind of follows the previous question pretty well, but to avoid like structuring nonlinear movement practice at home, in our home practices or daily practice. So not aiming for something because it gets the mind too involved in the practice. And I was wondering if you would say a little more about that, and how maybe these practices that you've been leading, these 1 hour sessions where we do focus and go more in depth on something, is there a way to kind of go in depth into a particular area in our home practice without imposing on ourselves or getting the mind too involved? Is it okay to focus on for example, love practice at home by ourselves?
Mhm.
Or how would you suggest doing that?
Good question. So the ideal scenario for home practice is that there's a structure around the practice that supports you being able to not be structured in the practice. So how you would do that is you would decide on a time frame, right? And so you kind of set a container by setting a time with a timer, let's say. Or how I do it in my own practice is I have a playlist of a specific length of time. You have to be careful that you don't do it on Spotify, where the Spotify then just plays other songs and you might be at it all night. But, so you do a playlist that has, like, let's say you have half an hour, you have an hour, or you have 10 minutes. You have a playlist, so you know from the beginning of the music till the end of the music, you're moving. So that's your structure. And then the rest of the structure is having a mat, so you have a specific area where you practice, and having your environment such that it feels conducive so your body can relax, right? So that's your external structure. Then within that, what I said on Saturday was it's not useful to just pick something and stick with it, like kind of as an imposition. But you can definitely start with something and then see how the body how the body works with that. So you could certainly say, today I'm focusing all on love, right? But I wouldn't do, today I'm going to attract the perfect man to me, right? So, which is what some people want to do, because that's super limiting, right? So you would say, I am going to imprint my entire being with love. And then you can, within the practice, always come back to love. Where you can go, I want to release something. And then you, in your practice, work with release, but then you'll probably find the same as with love, right? That other things will start happening. And it's fine to let those happen and ever so often feel if there's still more to release. So yes, you can theme practice, absolutely. You could also work with something very specific to begin with, but the key is to let the body unfold however the body unfolds, and the body might have totally different ideas than your mind has. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
So,
you
yeah.
very much.
So
Yeah.
external structure, have a word or a theme in your mind, and then unfold from there.
I was wondering if you could share a very quick story of what's the coolest thing that you've seen for people that like any like major, I don't know if that's confidential, or maybe for you, like what has been powerful, shifted or moved or been healed through using this?
I don't think I want to go too specific, because then it sounds a little bit like some crazy sales pitch or snake oil, right? Because of course, no modality heals all or can fix everything. That's anybody who tells you that their thing can fix it all is lying, just from the get-go. So that's why I'm not so willing to make big claims, but I would say that there's certain areas that people have had huge openings and shifts, and one area that people have really reported quite big shifts is in areas of chronic pain or chronic tension.
Oh, wow.
So, I've heard some really incredible stories about stuff having moved through their body, and also people having understood what was underneath. So that's one area where people experience a lot. I think for me personally, in my own application of it, I've worked with very severe trauma, people who've been extremely dissociated from extreme situations, and have had some really amazing results with that. Also, pleasure practice is one of the things that a lot of people report, that they have huge openings as to how their body responds to pleasure, or their access to pleasure. That's another one that I've certainly seen. For myself, I think I've had some really good personal experience. I don't know if you know that, you might not, but my house burned down in a wildfire. And so the entire process of the grief and the shock and the, you know, the incredible demand up till just a few, well, I mean, I'm still rebuilding. It's almost completely done, but it's been extremely brutal from a both emotional, but also financial and factual, you know, demand on me. And I've had to really, really work with my body in nonlinear to not get stuck, you know, in pain, in anger, in sorrow, in you know, just not wanting to go forward, you know, I mean, just a lot. And I would certainly say for myself, nonlinear is the thing that has kept me going. Also, so the death of my teaching partner, my previous teaching partner, died very traumatically. And that's grief and loss has been certainly my go-to as well. So
Thank you for sharing.
I think those are some of the areas that it's useful. And then, like I was saying earlier, there's areas that people report things that I could not even have thought about it, you know, like intergenerational stuff, or, you know, psychic stuff that only happens when you engage. And when you engage, then all kinds of things are possible. So,
okay. Thank you for sharing.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. I feel so blessed that, that I get to experience you online, because I never would have had this opportunity. So it's so special.
Oh.
I was on Saturday. I joined your 4-hour workshop on Saturday, and I loved it. I've loved all your offerings. I did have a question about the music in terms of lyrics versus instrumental. And if you could say something about that, because I noticed on Saturday you did play vocal lyrics, and maybe the difference and why you did that, and as opposed to the others where it's been just instrumental.
Good catch. Well, there's a few reasons. So in general, we say no lyrics because anything you hear gets you into your head or into a certain kind of an inquiry, right? So if lyrics can be understood, it's not a good idea to have lyrics, right? So as long as the lyrics can't be understood, voice, of course, is an incredibly powerful carrier wave. And in nonlinear movement, in the way I teach, and also in the music and in the way the whole thing goes, there is a transmission piece to it, right? Where my practice gets transmitted into your practice, and my voice gets transmitted into your, you know, body mind, so to speak. And of course, somebody's voice that has a specific sentiment, and that particular soundtrack has a very specific sentiment, which is prayer, is a carrier wave that can support something. But there's, of course, always a risk that it doesn't, because somebody doesn't like it. But I took that chance because because it was the second session of the day, and I felt like I wanted to kind of deepen the experience for everyone. So for those of you who want to know music, there is some playlists on that same page that has all the frequently asked questions and everything. And then a lot of the music I play is actually stuff that's been written for me by friends. I happen to have friends and clients who are musicians who equip me with music, and some of it is very obscure stuff that I found specifically. I'm in the process, though, for the teacher training, and I'll also make that public eventually, to create a really comprehensive playlist with different moods and different things of some of my favorite stuff. So that's coming when I have a moment. to sit for an entire day and just listen to music.
Just quickly, so I'm based in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And so thank you for the beautiful practice today. I just, this was my first time doing non-linear. My question was, so I meditate quite a lot, and I was really disassociated from my body years ago. So I still struggle with the movement for such a long time. So my question is, like, you know, when there was a resistance coming again and again, that I wanted to run away, because I know, like, it could be trauma, it could be freeze. So how do you deal with that? Is it just the mind thought not to? Because it's a different kind of meditation practice versus this, I would assume, a little bit different. Or is it similar?
Well, yes, it is different and it's not. There is meditation that pulls you out of your body, and there's meditation that brings the body along.
Yes.
Right? We tend to meditate based on our trauma response, is one way of saying that, right? Some people are very aggressive meditators. It's all about getting somewhere and, you know, let me do so many hours a day, you know, so that, and then there's people who are very, very avoidant, right? That's very hard for them to sit still or even with themselves. And then there's people who love sitting and meditating because that it goes with their natural freeze response. Now there's just people who don't have trauma responses, you know, but most of us have some trauma responses that correspond with the way we do nonlinear, with the way we meditate, with the way we make love, right? The same applies not only to meditation. There's fight style love making, freestyle love making, and flight style love making, so to speak, right? So, and there's of course also just normal meditation, normal love making, normal nonlinear. But we typically butt up against our trauma patterns in any practice we do, not only in our lives, right? And so it's good that you've noticed, moving that long is hard for me while sitting still that long isn't, right? It's good. So what that means is you have good attentional skill, you're able to focus, you have a certain restedness, that's perfect, right? Now you can look at what happens when you start moving. Like you said, do you have certain freeze things coming up? Do you want to kind of not do that? That's good to know, because you should be able to do with your body whatever is best, right? And that means meditate when it's time for meditation, moving when it's time for moving. So what you do then is, when you have those moments of, just slow it way down and maybe sit and just do this, right? Or lay down and just move one area that you can move. So you don't have to brutalize yourself or force yourself to do big things. You just do a tiny little bit. And that's like a little breadcrumb trail to where the thing holds, right? Just keep that going. It's like a thread. And then eventually we can unravel that thread more and more and more. But you have time, you do it slowly. Maybe you just do 10 minutes a day. And you use the longer sessions like we did today to explore where stuff gets stuck, and then you unravel it very slowly during the week. And that's perfectly fine. This is not some kind of performance sport or must do. It's an invitation for the body to unpack things.